is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, brought to you by Megan Tolentino. In this set of chapters, we get a little bit more of a look at exactly how Kaz feels about Inej. Some details about his past, which is a little bit more heart-wrenching than I expected. And we get to see what happens to the Grisha. Welcome to Spoil Me. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha, and it is time to start talking about another book that I have not covered in months at this point. Not months, it's been weeks. But this section is actually, I almost got to finish the entire thing. It's part 3, Heartsick, which contains 5 chapters total. But 4 chapters was 50 pages. So I only did the first 4, so there's 1 chapter remaining in this section. I am surprised to see how much longer this book is, because I think I mentioned before how difficult it is to know how long books are when you're reading them on Kindle. And it's got, after this section is over, part 3, there are 3 more parts, which each look to have at least like 6 chapters each. Actually, part 5 has like 10 chapters. So there's quite a bit left. And I am really enjoying the dialogue in this book. I don't know if when I've covered those chapters earlier, if I was just like, if the dialogue got better for these chapters, or if I just wasn't really appreciating it before. But there's a lot of like really funny little moments, and I was pleasantly surprised by how elevated doesn't seem to be the word, but how like on point, I guess, the humor is here. So chapter 16, the first chapter of this section, is Inej's point of view, and she wakes up after having been injured, and Nina is sitting there, and as soon as Nina is aware that Inej is going to be okay, she starts crying. Excuse me, I just had to take a sip of tea. My throat is so dry. And I really, really love this little scene. It's a throwaway thing in that you don't need it for the plot, but it's a really great couple of character moments where you get to see Inej be vulnerable because she's with somebody who she, as far as she knows and as far as we know as readers, does not have an agenda. So she gets to just kind of be herself, and she doesn't have to have her guard up the way that she does with Kaz. She has such a strange relationship with Kaz, as does everybody who like is associated with him to a degree, but it's stranger for her, even though she may not know how much stranger, because she's not aware, I don't think, of how he feels about her. But yeah, it's, a combination of feeling indebted to him and grateful for him and like, wanting to pay him back for like the way that he had her back in the past, but also knowing that he sees her as a commodity. We know that's not precisely true, but he is trying so hard to distance himself from her that whether he really feels that way or not, I think in practice it comes down to the same thing. Because I think if he were offered a choice between doing something to like make sure that this whole, this whole operation, this whole heist goes smoothly, and between like figuring out a way to save her life should something happen to her, I feel like in the end, he would go with saving the heist. I don't really think that that's a question at this time. And I prefer that, to be honest, character-wise, because we need somebody who is willing to like sacrifice everything they love just for the sake of the mission. There has to be somebody with those kinds of stakes involved. And from what I've seen of the other characters, none of them right now are of that mind. They each have their own stakes and their own attachments. And I don't think if it comes down to them or the mission that they are going to sacrifice what they care about for it. So, yeah, Kaz has to serve that purpose. So anyway, getting off track here, but the scene between her and Nina is really sweet because they're talking about her healing, and Nina wants to go and tell Kaz immediately that Inej is awake. And Inej asks her to wait until the morning and just let her have this time all to herself, which I really, like, it didn't really occur to me what kind of pressure she would be under the instant that he saw that she was going to be okay and pull through. But it makes so much sense that she just wants to rest and like be by herself for a minute. And she says something about how Kaz was afraid for Inej. Nina does. And Inej says, Kaz isn't afraid of anything. And she says, you should have seen his face when he brought you to me. I'm a very valuable investment. Nina's jaw dropped. Tell me he didn't say that. Of course he did. Well, not the valuable part. So little moments like that I really like. And then Nina like asks her to eat, but she can't, and talks about, because Nina wants to know why Inej manages to be a member of the dregs without actually having one of their tattoos. And as it turns out, and this is one of those things that is a small indicator of how Kaz feels about her. She says that Kaz told her he was not going to be the one to mark her again and let her make the choice on whether or not she wanted to get the tattoo. So he's giving her the kind of consideration that he has not given anybody else, right? Like that feels like a giveaway right there. Somehow he does not, I don't know. Somehow, despite what I feel is like kind of a clear giveaway, she has not put two and two together about how he feels about her. And he's very good at hiding it, so I can't quite blame her for that. But also, if she's like the sole exception, that really does seem to mean something. I also wanted to mention, because, you know, I had said last episode or the one before, I think, is the one where we have Inej run into the madam and remember her time working at the menagerie and how like gross and exoticized everything was. And that's a real thing that a lot of women of color deal with. And I got like very slight hints of it when I was younger. Is because I feel like when I was younger, I feel like it was more obvious that I was Hispanic than it is today. And there was always that sort of like, oh, Latin women, real fiery kind of like, but it was very, very low key because I did present whiter. So I was safe from some of that. But there's a section here that I really like that makes me want to get to know this author a little bit better, like as a person, to see where they're coming from, because it's a specific thing that I've heard from many women of color, and I feel like it doesn't get talked about quite enough. She talks about how the man who removed the menagerie tattoo had been really like basically a butcher. He had hacked away at her skin, leaving a puckered spill of wounds down her forearm. She hadn't cared. The pain was liberation. They had loved to talk about her skin at the House of Exotics. It was like coffee with sweet milk. It was like burnished caramel. It was like satin. She welcomed every cut of the knife and the scars it left behind. This is something that, you know, there's obviously a lot of like colorism even within communities of color, people who are lighter skinned tend to be more admired and seen as like a more beautiful standard, closer to whiteness. And because of that, we forget that when we give compliments, when I say we as white people, when we give compliments to people of color on their looks, especially if we are zeroing in on something that makes them very different, it really can toe that line or be right over the line of othering them, of making them feel like an object rather than a person. And this is something that I've seen, but wasn't really able to put into words at the time why it made me uncomfortable. And the person who was on the receiving end of it, they did not say anything, so I decided to let it go because I couldn't really put words to it. But now I know a little bit better what this kind of fetishization really is. And there is something, and I like especially that it's like coffee and caramel. There is something about the association with skin colors and food that is very specifically everywhere. It's in the names of like the types of makeup as well. Like if you look at the colors of makeup for women, it's ivory and sand and things like this. But when you get into women of color and those makeup names, it is things like mocha and chocolate and caramel and stuff like that, which feels much more like something to be consumed, right? Like there is a sort of consumptive association there. And it's a really, really fine line, and it's very like subtle. So I don't want to say that if anybody makes an observation, oh, isn't her skin beautiful? It looks just like coffee. That's automatically a negative thing. But there is a tone of that. I really think that when you hear it, that it's just sort of distancing that person from their humanity as you compliment them. And I like that is specifically addressed in her memory, because of the fact that she worked at the fucking House of the Exotics. That's where she was enslaved. Like, doesn't really get much more obvious than that. The whole concept of it feels really gross and really, really real, like incredibly true. This is absolutely a thing that happens in sex work, is women of certain races and colors being fetishized because of that. And it's just, kind of goes with it in many ways. So, all right, moving on from that section, but the two of them hanging out and Nina singing really badly is just kind of adorable. And I like the two of them being friendly with each other because they are the only two women in this whole situation. And I wasn't clear on how well they knew each other. But whether they know each other well or not, it seems like they're very comfortable with each other, which I like. Also, we find out exactly how Inej was captured. And she had been with her parents and was stolen right out of the wagon she was sleeping in, which is super scary. I don't know what I thought had happened. I guess I had assumed that when she was taken, so was her family, like that it all happened at once. But evidently, she's like alone while her parents are doing something else, and they come back to find her gone, which I just can't imagine that, like that's just one of those things that, and we joke about like kids getting taken by strangers. Like that was something that my mother used to say as a joke when I was a kid, and forgive using the slur. But she would be like, if you don't stop whining, I'm going to give you away to the gypsies kind of thing. And I think that a lot of us are unaware how much of a problem this still really is. Kids getting abducted specifically for trafficking, not just for like one person to abuse the child for their own personal pleasure. It's like a business that's still very, very rampant. And the United States is just as bad as many countries. It's incredibly rife, especially, I think, because sex work is not legalized. So I feel like there's a lot less protection for people who are going through this stuff. And it's something that is kind of a cause that's near and dear to my heart in a way, because it's something that, despite my mother's being incredibly feminist growing up, she always really did look down on the concept of sex work and stripping and all of those like industries as being something that women are coerced into doing. And the more I read and learn, the more I realize that that is true in cases when it is trafficking. That is not the same thing as sex work. Those are separate issues. And because somebody as progressive and feminist as my mom could make that kind of mistake, it really kind of hammered home to me how much education still remains to be done on that front, even with women who arguably are on the side of other women. Because legalizing it makes it safer for everybody. They don't have to worry about going to the cops to report something, because they aren't going to be arrested for solicitation if they are being trafficked against their will, which is definitely something that happens. So anyway, getting off on this tangent here, but the history with Inej, you know, when she gets captured and she's talking to other kids on this ship, there's a bunch of them who wind up being taken as well and telling her the stories of what happened. And the way that Tante Helene looks her over, the woman had held her lantern up and examined every inch of Inej, her teeth, her breasts, even her feet. She'd tugged on the matted hair on Inej's head. This will have to be shaved. Then she'd stepped back. Pretty, she said, scrawny and flat as a pan, but her skin is flawless. She'd turned away to barter with the sailors as Inej stood there, clutching her bound hands over her chest, her blouse still open, her skirt still hiked around her waist. Jesus Christ, you know? And she's what when this happens? 11, I think? She's really young. She's a fucking child. It's just really horrifying. And Tante Helene is pure evil. Pure evil. This is the kind of person that deserves to die. And I can't wrap my head around somebody buying a child with this kind of objective in mind. And it's especially difficult when it's women who perpetrate this kind of thing, which absolutely happens. There's been a few stories I've seen with women selling their own daughters, selling them because they wanted drugs or wanted money or were trying to get out of a debt or God knows what. And this is recently in the US. So yeah, it's just somehow harder because women are the victim of this so much of the time that you want to believe that other women are going to have more empathy, but they don't always. So yeah, this story is just straight up horrifying. So then we go to Jesper's POV, which is a little bit more entertaining and lighter in some ways. Poor Jesper is not happy being on this ship. He's just really, really restless. There's 6 whole more days to go when we're in his head, and he does not know how he's going to get through it. He's just fucking bored, man, you know? And he goes and has this conversation with Wylan, and the two of them, Wylan being the rich kid of a mercher, is really rubbing Jesper the wrong way. And when Wylan tries to take credit for them getting away from the getting out of the harbor alive, Jesper doesn't want him to take that credit and tries to act like it was just dumb luck. And Wylan's it was a calculated risk, to which Jesper says, it was cross your fingers and hope for the best. Believe me, I know the difference. So, this moment is interesting. Why do you think you know everything about me? I know plenty, Merchling. How nice for you. I feel like I'll never know enough. About what? About anything? Wylan muttered. Against his better judgment, Jesper was intrigued. Like what? He pressed. Well, Like those guns, he said, gesturing to Jesper's revolvers. They have an unusual firing mechanism, don't they? If I could take them apart, don't even think about it. Wylan shrugged. Or what about the ice moat? What about it? Where does all the water come from? The court is on a hill, so where's the aquifer or aqueduct to bring the water up? Does it matter? There's a bridge. We don't need to cross the ice moat. But aren't you curious? Saints, no. Get me a system for winning at 3-man bramble or maker's wheel. That I'm curious about. Wylan turned back to his work, his disappointment obvious. For some reason, Jesper felt a little disappointed too. I like that moment, and I can't put my finger on why. I think it's because Wylan seems to be making an effort to connect to Jesper, and despite the fact that they, are almost, it seems like they're both a little invested in trying to get along if they can, despite their animosity towards one another. They keep hitting these kinds of walls where it's really apparent how different they are from each other. And I feel like Wylan, we don't really know what happened between him and his father, and I'm wondering if we ever will find that out. But Wylan's curiosity, I feel like, is exactly the sort of thing needed for a heist like this. Because that curiosity leads to finding out things that other people may not know or pay attention to, and thus might help finding like other ways out, or people to help, or rooms or places to go to hide, or anything. I feel like the more questions you ask, the better about almost anything, because you are bound to get to a point where after asking that many questions, you start to be able to answer some of your own questions and find new paths, mentally speaking. And I think that Jesper wants to be a little bit more clever sometimes. And I'm not sure jealousy is exactly the word I want regarding how he feels about Wylan. Envy, maybe, or I don't know. I think maybe envy, just in terms of the kid being educated and having advantages and this kind of thing. But there's just this moment they're almost able to connect, and it's just not really possible. And it's neither of their faults. They're just such different people. And that can be kind of hard to realize that, I really wish we could be friends, but it's just not quite happening. I've had that with people before. So he finds out that Inej is still alive and is so excited. There's a really cute, and this is what I mean when I talk about the dialogue being kind of funny and witty between the two of them. So Nina is yelling at Inej about trying to stand up too quickly. And Inej says, Nina Zenek, as soon as I figure out where you've put my knives, we're going to have words. The first ones had better be, thank you, oh great Nina, for dedicating every waking moment of this miserable journey to saving my sorry life. Jesper expected Inej to laugh and was startled when she took Nina's face between her hands and said, thank you for keeping me in this world when fate seemed determined to drag me to the next. I owe you a life debt. Nina blushed deeply. I was teasing, Inej. She paused. I think we've both had enough of debts. This is one I'm glad to bear. Okay. When we're back in Ketterdam, take me out for waffles. Now Inej did laugh. Dessert for a life? I'm not sure that seems equitable. I expect really good waffles. I know just the place, said Jesper. They have this apple syrup. You're not invited, Nina said. There's just something about that moment. Nina is really funny. And when we get to Matthias's chapter a little bit further on, you get a bit more of that. And she just really is. I love her. She's such a pain in the ass in some ways, but she's also great. And I'm just delighted to have two women characters who are so very different, and I like both of them so much, So then we have Inej walking around the deck with Jesper. Forgive me, I'm cracking my knuckles here. I know that you guys can hear that. And she is taking it slow and chatting with him. Kaz like comes up to her at one point and just like stares at her and doesn't really say anything. And it's this really strange moment. And she talks to Jesper about what he's doing here in this, because obviously he's somebody who likes money and he will take jobs here and there. But even this job is a bit much for him. It's just so risky and so far outside of his comfort zone that it's really strange to her that he's here. And he confesses that he's in really bad debt, and he actually put up his father's farm as like collateral for his debt. And his father thinks that he's a student and does not know that like his farm is under threat, which is really fucked up. That's messed up. I needed the loan. I told him it's so I can finish my degree at university. He thinks you're a student? That's why I came to Ketterdam. My first week in the city, I went down to East Stave with some other students. I put a few Kruger on the table. It was a whim. I didn't even know the rules of Maker's Wheel. But when the dealer gave the wheel a spin, I'd never heard a more beautiful sound. I won, and I kept winning. It was the best night of my life. And you've been chasing it ever since. He nodded. I should have stayed in the library. I won. I lost some more. I needed money, so I started taking on work with the gangs. 2 guys jumped me in an alley one night. Kaz took them down, and we started doing jobs together. He probably hired those boys to attack you so you'd feel indebted to him. He wouldn't. Jesper stopped short, and then he laughed. Of course he would. Jesper flexed his knuckles, concentrated on the lines of his palms. Kaz is... I don't know. He's like nobody else I've ever known. He surprises me. Yes, like a hive of bees in your dresser drawer. I fucking died. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. When I reached that line, I fucking died. Like a hive of bees in your dresser drawer. Can you imagine? I got such a vivid image when I read that of somebody opening a drawer and finding a hive of bees in there, and it is hilarious. It's a very funny mental image. So yeah, this little conversation between the two of them is really like sweet, because they're confiding in each other and getting to know each other a little bit better. And that's just not something I feel like these people ever do, because they don't need to, because they don't work in this kind of proximity where they're constantly each other's only companions. Do you know what I mean? So, and there's this like conversation about what exactly happened with Wylan. First, Jesper tells Inej that Kaz went nuts when she got hurt, to which she says, of course he did. This is a 6-person job and he needs me. If I die, the plan falls apart. And Jesper didn't argue. He couldn't pretend to understand Kaz or what drove him. And I like that handling of it, that Jesper doesn't argue with her because he doesn't... If he argued with her, it would imply that he thinks that Kaz has feelings for her. But instead, it's more just like, well, I don't fucking know why he does anything, so maybe. Yeah, sure, you know. So then, yeah, they talk about Wylan. She says, 3 months ago, Wylan turned up at a flop house near the Slat. He was using a different surname, but Kaz keeps tabs on everyone new to the barrel, so he had me do some snooping. The servants at the Van Eck house are paid well enough that they're hard to bribe. The information I got didn't add up to much. There were rumors Wylan had been caught in a sweaty romp with one of his tutors. Really? Said Jesper incredulously. Hidden depths indeed. Just a rumor, and it's not as if Wylan left home to take up residence with a lover. So why did Papa Van Eck kick him out? I don't think he did. Van Eck writes to Wylan every week, and Wylan doesn't even open the letters. What do they say? Inej leaned back carefully on the railing. You're assuming I read them. You didn't? Of course I did. Then she frowned, remembering. They just said the same thing again and again. If you're reading this, then you know how much I wish to have you home. Or, I pray that you read these words and think of all you've left behind. Yeah, so Wylan's a bit of a mystery still. I'm very curious. I don't really have any theories on him yet. You know, like, I don't know. It could be any number of things. It could be like that he's just... that maybe he found out that his father was into some like sketchy stuff and didn't want to be associated with that anymore. Or maybe he found out they were expecting him to go into the family business and he was like, so, you know, like a Disney movie wherever anybody has expectations of anybody and they have to revolt against them. But I'm curious about it because I feel like it's going to become important later. So, Kaz's POV, next chapter, the third chapter in this section. He is a mess. In summary, he doesn't know how to handle how he feels about her because evidently it wasn't until she was stabbed that he realized how he felt about her. So now it's come to the surface in such a way that he cannot ignore it, but he really, really wants to. He would love to keep ignoring it. And he can't because guess what, guys? I don't know if you've ever been in love or suddenly realize that you have a terrible crush on somebody, but once that shit enters your brain in a real solid way, yeah, that's not going away. It's like a worm, a fungus that grows on everything, and everything in your life starts to be associated with that person somehow in ways that make no sense to anybody but you. So he comes over and wants to show her the plans, but it's obvious that he doesn't need to be doing this. She's seen the plans already. They've talked over whether or not she can do it, what she's been brought along to do. Like, there's no reason for him to be having this conversation. And when she asks him what the point of this is, you get his thought. And the thoughts that we get from him are a little bit more distinct than the ones from other perspectives so far. He thinks in full sentences in italics in the text. Whereas with other characters, and I'm not saying this throughout the book because obviously this happens with Matthias as well, but it's not as common, I feel like, with a lot of the other characters. So it's a very distinctive thing. And he thinks to himself after she's like, well, why are you telling, you know I can do this. What are you doing? He says, because I've been looking for an excuse to talk to you for 2 days, which is so funny to me because that is the kind of thing that really is evidence that there's feelings there. There is no reason for him to need an excuse to talk to her. Like, they are one of 6, 7 people on this ship. How many people? We've got Kaz, Matthias, Wylan, Jesper, Inej, Nina, and the dude who's steering the ship. So 7 people. There's not that many people to talk to. Winding up talking to her isn't going to seem that weird, dude. You don't have to overthink this so much. But I do really like the fact that he's so nervous now because he's so aware that he doesn't know how to handle this at all. So he tells her about how there's somebody that is supposed to be waiting in the harbor at the end of their whole scheme, and that is their getaway person. And if they are not there when they are supposed to be, that crew is screwed. And she's basically asking him how much he trusts the person that is meant to be waiting for them. Because somebody could, instead of waiting and helping, report them and probably get a bunch of money that way also. So the fine point here is that they have to know how much to pay this person, that they wouldn't make more via reporting. So she says, if the Farallend, which is the name of the ship, is intercepted, we'll have no way out of Dersholm. I'll get us out. You know that. Tell me you know that. He needed her to say it. This job wasn't like anything he'd attempted before. Every doubt she'd raised was a legitimate one, and only echoed the fears in his own head. He'd snapped at her before they left Ketterdam, told her he'd get a new spider for the job if she didn't think he could pull it off. He needed to know that she believed he could do this, that he could take them into the ice court and bring them out feeling whole and righteous the way he'd done with other crews on other jobs. He needed to know she believed in him. So this moment is really like kind of heartbreaking because we've seen how self-sufficient everyone thinks Kaz is and how isolated he seems from all other people. And to a degree, it seems that he likes that. But he doesn't want that when it comes to her anymore. And he's looking for validation from her that, of course, she would not give him because she doesn't think he would ever want or appreciate that from her. That I could see her thinking almost like validating him might cause offense, actually. So he's sitting here wishing that she would say that she believes he can do it. And rather than her like replying, I know you can, or anything like that, she changes the subject. And he's really bummed out by that. So then she points out about Pekka Rollins being the one that went after them in the harbor. And asks Kaz what the deal is between the two of them. Because she says, when you go after other gangs, it's business. But with Pekka Rollins, it's personal. Kaz kept his eyes on the sails above them and said, Pekka Rollins killed my brother. He didn't have to see Inej's face to sense her shock. You had a brother? I had a lot of things, he muttered. I'm sorry. Had he wanted her sympathy? Was that why he told her? Kaz, she hesitated. What would she do now? Try to lay a comforting hand on his arm? Tell him she understood? I'll pray for him, Inej said, for peace in the next world, if not in this one. He turned his head. They were sitting close together, their shoulders nearly touching. Her eyes were so brown they were almost black, and for once her hair was down. She always wore it tied back in a ruthlessly tight coil. Even the idea of being this near someone should have set his skin crawling. Instead, he thought, what happens if I move closer? So here we have again his revulsion to human contact, which does not seem to apply with her the way that it does with other people. But I'm super curious what that's about. I really don't know, because we get later on in this chapter some like looks at what it was like for him as a child, and we don't hear anything about this revulsion as a kid. So I feel like this is something that happened to him, but I don't know how true that is. So he says, I don't want your prayers. And she asks what he wants. And he thinks to himself, you, Inej, but then says, to die buried under the weight of my own gold. Inej sighed. Then I'll pray you get all you ask for. And he thinks later about everything that happened with him and his brother. So I'm going to tell this abbreviated version of this story. Geordie, his older brother, takes over caring for him when their father dies. There's no mention of their mother at all, I don't think. I'm going to look again. Yeah, I don't see any mention about their mom or what happened to him, or what happened to her. Their father was crushed beneath a plow. Geordie had sold the farm, but there wasn't a ton of money. So they have just enough to like travel. And Geordie's goal is that they go to Ketterdam and hole up until Geordie finds an actual job, and then they're able to live there while he works and raises his brother, and his brother will go to school. So I don't remember, and I'm looking again, I don't think we get an actual specific age for Geordie. When their father dies, specifically, we do know that Kaz is 9. So I'm going to put Geordie at like 15, maybe, because he seems to have a little bit more self-possession. And they meet this kid in the street. Geordie's trying, like, they get to Ketterdam. Everything seems okay at first, but Geordie's really having more trouble than he expected finding a job because of nepotism. He says everyone there is someone's cousin or brother or best friend's son. And they wind up going out and meeting some kid on the street corner that's selling little mechanical dogs. And they start chatting with this kid who tells him that he knows of somebody who's trying to hire runners, which I guess work for the stock exchange. And that he himself, the kid selling these little mechanical dogs, also wants to become a runner. But if Geordie's also interested, they could meet up with this guy who's looking to hire at around the same time. And tells him, like, if he wants to come by the next morning, maybe they can go on this together. And there's this really touching moment that I think is like a really nice touch in terms of making a memory feel simultaneously horrible and happy, which so many of our memories get tainted as we get older. Like, we'll look back and realize something about this situation that at the time seemed perfect. But you can still remember how perfect it seemed. Even through your knowledge that you have now, it's still, you can recall that feeling. So this moment is right after Geordie is told by this kid that there's an opportunity for him. On the way home, Geordie bought them each a hot chocolate, not just one to share. "Our luck is changing," he'd said, as they curled their hands around the steaming cups, feet dangling over a little bridge, the lights of the stave playing over the water. Kaz had looked down at their reflections on the bright surface of the canal and thought, "I feel lucky now." That's really kind of heartbreaking. So the next week was like a happy dream. Geordie and Philip worked for Mr. Hertzsoon as runners, carrying messages to and from the dock and occasionally placing orders for him at the exchange or other trading offices. While they were working, Kaz was allowed to stay at the coffee house. The man who filled drink orders from behind the bar would let him sit up on the counter and practice his magic tricks and gave Kaz all the hot chocolate he could drink. They were invited to the Hertzsoon home for dinner, a grand house on the Zelverstraat, with a blue front door and white lace curtains in the windows. Mr. Hertzsoon was a big man with a ruddy, friendly face and tufty gray sideburns. His wife, Margaret, pinched Kaz's cheeks and fed him hutspot made with smoked sausage, and he'd played in the kitchen with their daughter, Saskia. She was 10 years old, and Kaz thought she was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. It was the best Kaz had felt since his father died. He and Geordie stayed late into the night singing songs while Margaret played the piano, their big silver dog thumping its tail in hapless rhythm. Mr. Hertzsoon even let Geordie put tiny sums down on company stocks. Geordie wanted to invest more, but Mr. Hertzsoon always advised caution. Small steps, lad, small steps. Things got even better when Mr. Hertzsoon's friend returned from Novia Zem. He was the captain of a Kerch trader, and it seemed he had crossed paths with a sugar farmer in a Zemeni port. The farmer had been in his cups moaning about how his and his neighbor's cane fields had been flooded. Right now, sugar prices were low, but when people found out how hard it would be to get sugar in the coming months, prices would soar. Mr. Hertzsoon's friend intended to buy up all the sugar he could before the news reached Ketterdam. "That seems like cheating," Kaz whispered to Geordie. It isn't cheating, Geordie had snorted. It's just good business. And how are ordinary people supposed to move up in the world without a little extra help? Mr. Hertzoon had Geordie and Philip place the orders with 3 separate offices to make sure such a large purchase didn't garner unwanted attention. News of the failed crop came in, and sitting in the coffee house, the boys had watched the prices on the chalkboard rise, trying to contain their glee. When Mr. Hertzoon thought the shares had gone as high as they could go, he sent Geordie and Philip to sell out and collect. They'd returned to the coffee house, and Mr. Hertzoon had handed both of them their profits straight from his safe. "What did I tell you?" Geordie said to Kaz. "Luck and good friends." Only a few days later, Mr. Hertzoon told them of another tip he had received from his friend the captain, who'd gotten similar word on the next crop of Jorda. "This is going to be big money, and I intend to go in heavy." "Then we should too," said Philip. Mr. Hertzoon had frowned. "I'm afraid this isn't a deal for you, boys. The minimum investment is far too high for either of you. But there will be more trades to come." So, in summary, classic con. Classic. You become friends with the Mark, offer them an opportunity that seems like it might be too good to be true. It turns out that it does pay off. Get the Mark feeling comfortable, and then you hit them with the second, harder, bigger scam and disappear. Because, spoiler alert, he keeps acting like, "Oh, I'm so worried about having you invest, and it would take all of the money that you've got, and you really shouldn't be gambling it this way, and I can't let you do this," and it's all concern. But secretly, he knows that what he's done in setting these kids up for their fall, and eventually they convince him, in quotes, to let them invest, and the next day, when they go down to the coffee house, or the next week, because he says, "Come down in a week and you'll see everything." They'd walked hand in hand to the coffee house. It was empty. The front door was locked and bolted. When they pressed their faces to the dark windows, they saw that everything was gone. The tables and chairs and big copper urns, the chalkboards where the figures for the day's trades had been posted. "Do we have the wrong corner?" asked Kaz, but they knew they didn't. In nervous silence, they walked to the house on Zelverstraat. No one answered their knock on the bright blue door. "They've just gone out for a while," said Geordie. "They waited on the step for hours, until the sun began to set. No one came or went. No candles were lit in the windows." Finally, Geordie worked up the courage to knock on a neighbor's door. "Yes," said the maid who answered in her little white cap. "Do you know where the family next door has gone, the Hertzoons?" The maid's brow furrowed. "I think they were just visiting for a time from Zerfurt." "No," Geordie said. "They've lived there for years. The maid shook her head. "That house stood empty for nearly a year after the last family moved away. It was only rented a few weeks ago." "But—" She'd closed the door in his face. Yeah. So this is his thinking about what happened to his brother. But by the end of this story, his brother is still alive, and the man might be Petra, but he was going by a different name, so I'm not entirely sure what the actual, because the only thing I can think is that his brother killed himself, but that doesn't seem, his brother was still very deep in denial that he had been conned by the end of this story. So I'm not positive that that's and I'm just, we're getting doled out tiny pieces of their histories, and it's really compelling, honestly. So, speaking of, we go to the next chapter, which is from Matthias's point of view. And Matthias, as usual, is very prickly. Nina is here to let him out of his restraints and tailor him, as she puts it, which I was like, what does that mean? But it's to change his appearance. And he wants to know why she doesn't just change his appearance when they're closer to their goal. But she says that she has to start now because she's not that good at it. And that she has to like kind of work her way up to it in increments. And I like that when she says, I don't have an affinity for it. Matthias snorted. What? She asked. I've never heard you admit you're not good at something. Well, it happens so rarely. He was horrified to find his lips curling in a smile, but it was easy enough to quell when he thought of his face being changed. What does Brecker want you to do to me? Nothing radical. I'll change your eye color, your hair, what you have of it. It won't be permanent. So she starts changing his hair and eye color, and of course, her doing this tailoring requires a sort of intimacy in the way that she's standing and looking at him and almost touching him or actually touching him at times. And it's really hard for him to like remain cool in the face of this. At one point he blurts out, "You don't smell like roses anymore." And she says, "I probably smell like boat." No, she smelled sweet. Perfect, like toffee. Her eyes slid away guiltily. Kaz had to pack what we needed for the journey. A girl has to eat. She reached into her pocket and drew out a bag of toffees. Want one? Yes. No. She shrugged and popped one in her mouth. Her eyes rolled back and she sighed happily. So good. It was a humiliating epiphany, but he knew he could have watched her eat all day. This is one of the things he'd liked best about Nina. She savored everything, whether it was a toffee or cold water from a stream or dried reindeer meat. So she's doing the alterations, and he demands to know what she's going to do about Bull Bayur. And she pretends not to know what he means, and he's like, come on. I don't believe for a second you'll let these people hand Bull Bayur over to the Kirch Merchant Council. She put the bottle back in one of the little drawers. We need to do this at least 2 more times, and just like totally changes the subject, does not answer him, and just leaves. So I am very curious what she plans to do. I'm not sure she has a plan, to be honest. I think she just has a vague, like, opportunistic, I will fuck them over somehow when I get to it kind of thought in her head that's not really clear. So they finally reach the land, and it's absolutely freezing cold, and everybody is a little bit unprepared for it, except for Matthias, because nobody's been up this far north, and they're just not familiar with real cold. But Matthias is surprised at how little they complain after a while, that they adjust so quickly, and thinks to himself, well, they're survivors. They adapt. Which I do appreciate that he can see that, as much as he doesn't really respect any of these people. And then he thinks back to, because he's back in his homeland now, and it's really affecting him. And he thinks back to what happened when it's kind of an abrupt, like, we don't even realize that he's thinking about this yet, I don't think. I'm trying to find the exact moment with the transition, because they're talking about what's going on with, like, the holding cells and who's going to be doing what, and that Nina and Matthias are going to be paired up together for this mission, which Jesper asks if that's really a good idea. And I'm trying to find the exact moment. I'm sorry, guys. The spot. Oh, here it is. Farther south they traveled, the coast long gone, the ice broken more and more by slashes of forest. They drilled each other constantly on the architecture and procedures of the court, the layout of the Ringwall's 3 gatehouses, each built around a courtyard. And they talk about how many rings the bells make for each thing, like, because there are bells that signal different things, different changes of guard and different moments. And And this is the moment. If his calculations were right, they'd washed up only a few miles from where the Farallon had put into shore. It had started with a storm, and in a way, that storm had never ended. Nina had blown into his life with the wind and rain and set his world spinning. And then we go into the flashback. The storm had come out of nowhere, tossing the ship like a toy on the waves. The sea had played along until it had tired of the game and dragged their boat under in a tangle of rope and sail and screaming men. Well, spoiler, Nina saves his life. And he thinks like that he can get along by himself when he wakes up in her arms as she's dragging him up to the surface, and tries to get away from her. And as soon as he's out of her arms, he's suddenly like way more tired, more injured, and freezing cold, and realizes that he is about to drown. Like, this is on. And finally calls to her and has her pick him up again. And he like hates himself for depending on her witchcraft. But he will die if he doesn't. And he can't seem to bear that. Which I think he's, in his heart of hearts, more guilty about than anything, that he accepted her help rather than let himself die. Because I think that's what he believes the honorable thing to do would have been. And when they finally get to land, and I mean, it takes a while. It's pretty surprising that they don't like lose some toes to frostbite. They find this hut that has some kindling in it, and they are able to like try and light a very small fire, but everything is just kind of soaked from the storm. And he realizes that she is like on the edge of dying and helps her get to the hut in the first place, feeling like he owes her, and that's the only reason that he's doing this, because she saved his life, and you know, one turn for another. But there's also like the first inkling of him admiring her at the same time. And he as he's making the fire, he turns around and sees that she is getting undressed, because of course she is. She's covered in soaking wet, ice cold clothing. And he tells her to put her clothes back on, and she says, "I'm not going to freeze to death to preserve your sense of modesty." And continues with this stuff like, for saint's sake, Driscoll, what's wrong with you? I just wanted to be warm. I promised not to ravish you in your sleep. I'm not afraid of you, he said irritably. Her grin was vicious. Then you're as stupid as you look. Don't even think about getting near me in those clothes. You're soaked through. Because he tries to like lay down near her. And they have to stay near each other to stay warm. But she's not having it. He's still in his soaked clothes. And he says, "You can keep our blood flowing. I'm exhausted," she said angrily. "And once I fall asleep, all we'll have is that fire to keep us warm. I can see you shaking from here. Are all Fjerdans this prudish?" No. Maybe. He didn't really know. The Driscoll were a holy order. They were meant to live chastely until they took wives. Good Fjerdan wives who didn't run around yelling at people and taking their clothes off. "Are all Grisha so immodest?" he asked defensively. "Boys and girls train side by side together in the first and second armies. There isn't a lot of room for maidenly blushing." "It's not natural for women to fight. It's not natural for someone to be as stupid as he is tall, and yet there you stand." I love her so much. So much. And I love when she says, "Did you really swim all those miles just to die in this hut? It's a lodge, and you don't know that we swam miles." Oh my God, talk about focusing on the wrong fucking thing. He's so infuriating. Oh, he's so infuriating. He's a really good character. I love it. So finally, she's just like, "Fine, fucking stay there. I'm laying here and getting warm by myself." And finally, he strips down and gets in behind her. And she says, "You're cold and clammy. It's like lying next to a burly squid." And So she lays her hands on his chest and then gets his blood flowing so that his body starts to warm up again. And he relaxes. And she flips over. And he had said, what is it? You told me to get closer. Ease up a bit. What are you doing? He asked. Relax, Driscoll. This isn't where I have my way with you. His blue eyes narrowed. I hate the way you talk. So when she gets him warm, she flips over and says, You're welcome, you big idiot. He'd lied. He did like the way she talked. I love it. I love it so much. I love it so much. It really does remind me in some ways of me and Owen. Owen is not dumb like Matthias, but Owen does like it when I give him a hard time. It's like part of our favorite thing is to just tease each other. And, oh man, we can just be so like endless with it. We'll just go for like a half hour straight, just fucking poking and prodding at each other. It's very fun. But yeah, this leads to this awful moment because we come out of that flashback to him trying to stop them from coming over a rise and seeing something below them. There is a pyre. 3 stakes had been driven into the icy ground, and 3 charred bodies were bound to them, their blackened, cracked skin still smoldering. Gesen, swore Wylan, what is this? This is what Fjerdans do to Grisha, Nina said. It's what criminals do, said Matthias. The pyres have been illegal since... Don't you dare. Tell me the last time someone was prosecuted for putting a Grisha to the flames. Do you even call it murder when you put down dogs? Nina, do you have a different name for killing when you wear a uniform to do it? And then it turns out one of these fucking people is still alive after having been burned to death. Like, it was pretty horrifying already, but when I got that little reveal, I was not ready for it. And I caught my breath a bit. Like, just, that's so much worse. And Nina is like almost on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Like she's crying and shaking and is just like, please, somebody. And Jesper shoots the person in the head. And although Kaz is angry that Jesper has like announced their position, Inej, because he's like, you should have let Inej do it. Inej says, I didn't want to do it. Thank you, Jesper. Kaz's jaw ticked, but he said nothing more. Thank you, Nina choked out. She plunged ahead over the frozen ground, following the shape of the path through the snow. She was weeping, stumbling over the terrain. Matthias followed. Nina, you mustn't stray from the group. That's what you're going back to, Helvar. That's the country you long to serve. Does it make you proud? I've never sent a Grisha to the pyre. Grisha are given a fair trial. She turned on him, goggles up, tears frozen on her cheeks. Then why has a Grisha never been found innocent at the ends of your supposedly fair trials? Because our crime is existing. Our crime is what we are. Nina, has it ever occurred to you that maybe you weren't meant to exist? Nina's eyes glinted green fire. She took a step toward him and he could feel the rage radiating off her. Maybe you're the ones who shouldn't exist, Helvar. Weak and soft with your short lives and your sad little prejudices. You worship wood sprites and ice spirits who can't be bothered to show themselves, but you see real power and you can't wait to stamp it out. Don't mock what you don't understand. My mockery offends you? My people would welcome your laughter in place of this barbarity. Ravka is rebuilding. So is the Second Army. And when they do, I hope they give you the fair trial you deserve. I hope they put the Driscoll in shackles and make them stand to hear their crimes enumerated so the world will have an accounting of your evils. And she tells him that she hopes he's pardoned so that he's there when they all get torn to pieces, which I was like, that is cold-blooded, and I'm not mad at you at all, girl, to be honest. And then he tells her, my mother, my father, my baby sister, infernal soldiers, your precious persecuted Grisha, burned our village to the ground. I have nothing left to lose. Nina's laugh was bitter. Maybe your stay in Hellgate was too short, Matthias. There's always more to lose. So yeah, he's trying to be like, oh, well, they did. Yeah, maybe because you're fucking committing genocide against them? I'm not sorry for you, dude. At all, to be honest. So, these were really good chapters, is what I'm saying. There is nobody in the chat here, so there's nobody to ask me any more questions, and I'm already over time, so I'm going to wrap this up. I want to say thank you again to Megan Tolentino for commissioning this episode. It was super, super fun to read this again. I love these characters. The heist, honestly, I love heists so much, and it's actually secondary now because I like the characters so much. So yeah, guys, I really hope that somebody comes through with the next chapters for this. Actually, they may have already. I got a couple emails. And I will alert you all. I'm sorry I didn't make an event on Facebook for this one. I fell behind and I forgot to do it. And then I realized today that I had never done it. And I was like, God damn. But I will for the next one, I promise. And I just thank you all so much for coming through on these commissions. It's really been awesome and a lot of fun. And I just didn't expect this to go so well. So if you're interested in commissioning anything, go to unspoiledpodcast.com/shop. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.